Hey everyone, I'm Ellie, and I'm coming to you today from my little corner of Toronto. Life has a funny way of unfolding. Sometimes the things you rely on the most, the people you love the deepest, they turn out to be the very ones who show you who you really are, not through support, but through the sheer force of disappointment. Right now, my life looks pretty different than it did just a couple of years ago. I'm running a successful skincare business, something I built from the ground up with my own two hands. It feels amazing to say that out loud. But getting here well, it was a journey through a kind of wilderness I never expected to traverse, and it started with something as simple and heartbreaking as Christmas presents. There was a time, not that long ago, when I literally couldn't afford to buy anyone anything nice. Not what my family considered nice, anyway. I was pouring every spare cent, every ounce of energy, into this dream I had, making beautiful, effective skincare using natural ingredients. It was my passion, my escape, my hope. So, holiday gifts, birthday presents? They were jars of my latest face cream, bottles of serum, bars of handmade soap, wrapped with care, tied with ribbon, made with love. I thought they would see the care, the effort, the piece of my soul I poured into each little jar. I thought they would be proud, or at least appreciative. But sometimes, when you're trying to build something from nothing, the people closest to you can't see past their own expectations, their own sense of what's valuable. And for me, that meant facing a kind of quiet, persistent dismissal that chipped away at me day after day. It hurt. God, it hurt. It felt like I was invisible, or worse, a burden. Like my efforts were cute, maybe, but ultimately worthless compared to whatever my sibling was doing, or what my mother decided was important that week. There was a pattern of needing me for my labor, my time, my quiet presence, but never for my dreams, my ambitions, or my growing skills. And it all came crashing down around a moment that felt small at the time, but cracked my world wide open. A moment that involved my handmade gifts and the stark, painful truth of favoritism and betrayal. It took hitting rock bottom, feeling utterly alone and used, to find the strength I didn't know I had. To realize that sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't giving more of yourself, but reclaiming the pieces that have been taken. It's a story about finding your voice when you've been silenced, about building your own worth when others try to tear it down, and about what happens when you finally decide that you are worth fighting for. So, settle in. This isn't an easy story to tell, but it's mine. And if you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or betrayed by people you thought would always have your back, maybe you'll see a piece of yourself in it too. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps me feel less alone, and trust me, there were times I felt utterly, completely isolated. This is the story of how I found my way back. The smell of lavender and shea butter used to be my sanctuary. In the tiny kitchen of my rental apartment in Toronto's West End, surrounded by beakers and scales and glass jars, I felt like myself. It was a stark contrast to the other parts of my life, especially the moments spent with my family. There, I often felt like a shadow, present but unseen, my contributions acknowledged only when they served someone else's needs. I loved making skincare. I researched ingredients for hours, learning about their properties, their histories, their benefits. Mixing oils and butters, watching emulsions form, testing textures on my skin. It was a quiet joy, a place where I felt competent and in control. My apartment, usually cluttered with boxes of ingredients and stacks of empty containers, was my laboratory, my escape pod. My family, however, saw it differently. My mother, bless her practical, status-obsessed heart, viewed it as a peculiar hobby. "Oh, that stuff Ellie plays with," she'd say to relatives, often within earshot. My older brother, Mark, who was the undisputed golden child, barely acknowledged it unless he needed a free sample for his girlfriend or a favor that involved my car or my time. My sister, Sarah, younger and perpetually in some kind of dramatic crisis that demanded my mother's full attention and often financial support, would occasionally ask for products. but usually with an air of doing me a favor by taking them off my hands. Money was always tight. I worked a series of part-time jobs, waitressing, freelance writing gigs, anything to cover rent and buy ingredients. Ingredients weren't cheap, especially the good ones. So, when holidays or birthdays rolled around, I couldn't afford the expensive perfumes my mother hinted at, or the designer wallets Mark expected, or the trendy gadgets Sarah coveted. What I could offer, with genuine love and hours of effort, were my products. I'd spend days leading up to Christmas or Mother's Day, carefully crafting special batches. A rich face cream infused with frankincense for Mom, a refreshing shave oil for Mark, a calming bath soak for Sarah. I'd package them beautifully, tie ribbons, and write heartfelt cards explaining the ingredients and the care that went into them. They weren't just gifts, they were pieces of my passion, offered with vulnerability. The reactions were underwhelming. My mother would hold the jar delicately, nod, and place it on a side table, often forgetting about it until months later when she'd ask, "Ellie, what is this little pot here?" Mark would take it with a grunt and maybe a perfunctory thanks before tossing it in a bag. Sarah would demand to know if it was as good as the store stuff and usually complain about the scent or the texture. There were never effusive thanks, never genuine curiosity about my process, never pride. It was just accepted, like an obligation fulfilled, less valuable than the cheap bottle of wine someone else brought. The contrast was always stark when Mark unwrapped his gifts. Even if they were modest, my mother would exclaim over them, analyze their practicality, praise his friends for their thoughtfulness. Sarah's often extravagant demands were met with sighs and complaints about money, but met nonetheless. Their hobbies, their jobs, even the temporary, ill-advised ones, their relationships, they were topics of intense discussion, analysis, and investment. Mine? It was just that stuff. The year that stands out the most, the one that felt like a turning point, was the Christmas I gave my mother a specially formulated night cream with rare oils I'd saved for weeks to afford. It was potent, luxurious, designed to address her specific skin concerns. I was so proud of it. She unwrapped it at our family gathering, held it for a moment, and then, looking across the room at Mark, who was showing off a new gadget, she said, loud enough for several people to hear, "Oh, another one of Ellie's concoctions. Handy for moisturizing, I suppose." And then to Mark, "Isn't that new phone just marvelous, dear? So much better than that old thing." It was a small comment, but it landed like a punch. Handy for moisturizing, I suppose. Not, "Wow, Ellie, you made this?" Or, "Tell me about these ingredients." Or even just a simple, warm, "Thank you." Just a polite, dismissive nod to its basic function, immediately overshadowed by praise for something store-bought and expensive, given to the favored child. That night, I went home and cried, not just for the dismissed gift, but for years of feeling like I was on the periphery of my own family. Years of being the quiet one who didn't demand attention, who just did things, helped out, listened, showed up, and worked tirelessly on her passion in silence. Years of watching Mark and Sarah take center stage, their needs prioritized, their struggles dramatized, their minor successes celebrated like triumphs. My work, my passion, my growing skill, it was invisible. This pattern wasn't limited to gifts or hobbies. It seeped into every interaction. If I mentioned a problem at work, it was brushed aside because Sarah had a real crisis with her landlord. Or Mark had a huge deal falling through, which usually meant he had to work a few extra hours. If I needed help moving furniture, I was told everyone was busy, but if Mark needed a ride to the airport at 4 a.m., I was expected to drop everything, cheerfully, and often pay for the gas myself. My time, my energy, my resources, they were seen as communal, available for anyone in the family to tap into, especially Mark and Sarah, without much thought for my own needs or boundaries. The financial exploitation was more subtle, but equally damaging. My mother would occasionally borrow money, small amounts at first, just until payday. These loans rarely came back, and asking for them back felt like an impossible hurdle, met with sighs and implications that I was being difficult during a tough time, which was always, perpetually, a tough time for someone else in the family. Once, when I mentioned needing a new part for my aging car, crucial for my work, my mother suggested I just ask Mark. I knew instinctively Mark wouldn't help. Not without making a production of it or demanding a favor in return that would cost me more than the part. It was easier to just struggle and pay for it myself. The emotional cost was immense. I started to believe their narrative, that my work was a hobby, my dreams insignificant, my needs secondary. I became a master of minimizing myself, speaking softly about my business, deflecting questions, bracing myself for the inevitable indifference or veiled criticism. I felt a constant hum of anxiety around my family, a pressure to perform the role of the supportive, undemanding daughter, sister, always ready to lend an ear, a hand, or a few dollars. I remember sitting through endless family dinners where the conversation revolved entirely around Mark's career trajectory, his dating life, his opinions on politics, or Sarah's latest roommate drama. Her relationship woes, her fluctuating finances. I'd sit there, listening, offering quiet support when prompted, feeling utterly erased. If I tried to share something about my business, a new ingredient I was excited about, a positive feedback I received, the conversation would invariably pivot back to Mark or Sarah within minutes. It wasn't just accidental oversight. It felt deliberate, a reinforcing of the family hierarchy where the golden child, Mark, shone brightest, the problem child, Sarah, demanded attention and resources, and the good child, me, was expected to be quiet, compliant, and supportive of the others. My accomplishments, however small, were threats to this established order, disruptions to the narrative that Mark and Sarah were the ones who needed focus and help. The facade began to crack not long after that Christmas. I was particularly low on funds, struggling to pay for a new batch of ingredients for an order I'd finally secured. A small online boutique had agreed to stock a few of my products. It was a huge step, a real order, not just a family member taking a sample. My mother called, not to congratulate me, but to ask if I could lend her some money. Again. She needed it for Sarah, who was short on rent again. My stomach clenched. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was the money I needed for the ingredients. Refusing felt impossible. The guilt trip was already being laid on thick. Sarah's really struggling, Ellie. She doesn't know what she'll do. We have to help family. I hesitated. I thought about the hours I'd put into landing that order, the hope it represented. I thought about the countless times I'd bailed them out, financially or emotionally, always prioritizing their needs over my own fragile progress. And I thought about the night cream, dismissed as handy for moisturizing, I suppose. Something inside me just snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but a quiet, firm break. I can't, Mom, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I need that money for my business. I have an order I need to fulfill. Silence on the other end. A long, shocked silence. Then the temperature of her voice dropped several degrees. Your business? Ellie, Sarah is about to be evicted. Your little hobby can wait. This is family. My business is how I pay my bills, Mom. It's not a hobby anymore. And I can't keep sacrificing what I need for other people, not when I'm trying to build something. My voice was stronger now, fueled by a mix of fear and righteous indignation. Sacrifice? She repeated, her tone sharp with disbelief. What are you sacrificing? A few dollars for your pots and jars? Sarah needs a roof over her head. How can you be so selfish? Selfish. The word echoed in my ears. I had spent my entire life being anything but selfish. I had given, and given, and given, until I was empty. And this was the reward? Being called selfish for, finally, putting my own oxygen mask on first? It's not selfish to need to fund my work, Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. I understand Sarah is having trouble, but I can't fix everything for everyone. I just can't. The call ended shortly after, not with a resolution, but with a cold, lingering silence that felt heavier than any argument. My mother didn't call back. Sarah didn't call. Mark certainly didn't call. The usual flow of family communication, however superficial, ceased. I was in exile. The silence was deafening at first. The usual flurry of texts and calls, requests, demands, complaints, stopped. It felt like a physical absence, a limb missing. I'd grown so used to orbiting their needs that without them pulling at me, I felt adrift. The guilt gnawed at me. Had I been too harsh? Was I really selfish? The family narrative was deeply ingrained, and challenging it felt like tearing a piece of myself away. But amidst the guilt, there was a flicker of something new. Space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to just be. Without the constant pressure to perform my assigned family role, I had more energy. I channeled it into my work. I used the money I'd saved, the money I'd refused to lend, to buy the ingredients. I made the batch for the online boutique, carefully measured, mixed, and packaged. Sending that box off felt like sending a piece of myself out into the world, not for validation from family, but for validation from strangers who saw value in what I created. The boutique order went well. They placed another one, then another. I started getting messages from their customers, asking about my products, raving about how much they loved them. These were people I didn't know, who owed me nothing, yet their genuine appreciation felt like a balm to my wounded spirit. They saw the quality, they felt the care. They didn't see Ellie's concoctions, they saw effective, beautiful skincare. I built a simple website. I took my own photos, wrote descriptions late into the night. I learned about online marketing, social media, shipping logistics. Every step was a challenge, but it was my challenge. There was no family drama to distract me, no passive-aggressive comments to derail my confidence. There was just the work, the products, and the growing connection with customers who valued what I did. Meanwhile, the family silence persisted. My mother would occasionally send a brief, clipped text, usually something practical like, "Are you coming for dinner Sunday?" But without the usual warmth or follow-up. If I said yes, the interactions were strained, the conversation carefully skirting around anything meaningful, especially my business. If I said no, citing work or needing time for myself, the chill intensified. Mark remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant. Sarah sent a resentful text weeks later, complaining about how I hadn't helped her. There was no apology, no understanding, just a reinforcing of the idea that I had failed in my duty to them. It hurt, but each painful interaction, each cold shoulder, reinforced my decision. The cost of staying in their good graces was too high. It required me to shrink, to hide my successes, to always be ready to rescue them. Stepping away, however painful, was necessary for my survival, not just emotionally, but also for my business to thrive. I met Emily through a mutual friend who had bought my products and loved them. Emily was a business consultant, sharp, insightful, and incredibly supportive. She didn't see my business as small. She saw its potential. She helped me refine my branding, understand financials, and develop a growth strategy. For the first time, I had someone in my corner who saw my vision and believed in me unconditionally. With Emily's guidance, things began to accelerate. Sales picked up. I expanded my product line. I moved into a slightly larger apartment, dedicating a separate room to my work. It felt like a massive leap, like I was finally gaining momentum after years of being held back. One day, out of the blue, I received an email. It was from a major national retailer, expressing interest in carrying my line. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It felt surreal. Was this a scam? I read it again, slowly. It was real. This led to meetings, negotiations, presentations. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I talked about my ingredients, my philosophy, the care that went into each product. I talked about my journey, carefully omitting the painful family dynamics, but emphasizing the passion and resilience that had brought me here. They saw the authenticity, the quality, the unique story. During this whirlwind, I barely had time to think about my family. The distance had grown. Our interactions were minimal, polite, superficial. They still didn't seem to grasp the scale of what I was doing. When I vaguely mentioned meeting with a large company, my mother said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," and immediately changed the subject to Mark's new car. I stopped trying to share. It was less painful that way. The offer came through a few months later. A multi-million-dollar deal to acquire a significant stake in my company and distribute my products nationwide. I read the number on the page, and the world tilted slightly. Multi-million. The girl who couldn't afford fancy presents, who gave away handmade samples dismissed as concoctions, was now holding a paper with that number on it. I was sitting in my apartment, the one that used to be crammed with boxes of ingredients, now feeling spacious and full of light. I was alone when I got the news. No family to celebrate with, no one to call and share the breathtaking reality. There was a pang of sadness, a ghost of the longing for that unconditional family pride I'd never received. But it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of something else. Pride in myself. Pure, unadulterated, hard-won pride. I had done this. Alone. Despite the lack of support, despite the dismissal, despite the subtle sabotage and overt favoritism, I had built this. The money wasn't just a number, it was validation. Validation of my work, my skill, my vision. Validation that I was capable, worthy, and deserving of success. I signed the papers in a lawyer's office downtown, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. Afterward, I didn't go home immediately. I walked through the city where I had struggled and dreamed and built. I thought about all the early mornings spent mixing batches, the late nights designing labels, the countless hours researching and perfecting. I thought about the tears shed over dismissive comments and unpaid loans. I thought about my mother calling my passion a hobby. I thought about Mark's indifference and Sarah's resentment. They hadn't supported my climb, but in a twisted way, their lack of support had been its own kind of fuel. It had forced me to rely on myself, to find my inner resilience, to prove them wrong, not for their sake, but for mine. News of the deal eventually reached my family. Not from me, but likely through a mutual acquaintance or a local news blurb about a Toronto entrepreneur. The reactions were predictable, and yet still managed to sting in their own way. My mother called. Her voice was different, higher pitched, a little breathless. "Ellie, is this true, this news, about your business?" "Yes, Mom. It's true," I said, my voice calm, steady. I felt a detachment, like I was observing the conversation from a distance. "Millions? Ellie, why didn't you tell us?" There was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. Was it pride? Resentment? A strange mix of both? "I tried to tell you about my business for years, Mom," I said gently. "But you always seemed busy, or focused on Mark and Sarah." A pause. "Well, yes, they needed me. But this is wonderful, dear. We are so proud of you." The sudden, effusive pride felt jarring, artificial. Where had this been when I needed it most? "Thank you, Mom," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "You must come for dinner. We must celebrate. Mark wants to hear all about it. He has some business ideas, maybe you could advise him." And there it was, the pivot. My success immediately reframed as a resource for the golden child. I took a deep breath. This was the boundary. The point where I had to decide if I was going back into the old dynamic, or if I was going to stand in my new truth. "I appreciate the invitation, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "But I'm very busy right now with the transition. And honestly, Mom, I'm not sure I'm ready for a big family celebration. It's been a difficult journey, and I did most of it without much support." The breathiness left her voice, replaced by the familiar chill. Without support, Ellie, we are your family. We were always here. Were you? I asked, the question quiet, but potent. Were you here when I was struggling financially and asked for the money back you borrowed? Were you here when you called my passion a hobby and dismissed my work? Were you here when you always prioritized Mark and Sarah's needs over mine? It's okay if you weren't, Mom. But please don't pretend you were. Another silence. This one felt different. Less like shock, more like a calculated withdrawal. Well, she said, her voice tight. If that's how you feel, it seems success has changed you, Ellie. It has, Mom, I agreed. It taught me my worth. We ended the call soon after. The conversation with Mark was similar, a strained mixture of congratulations and thinly veiled attempts to leverage my success for his own ventures. Sarah was resentful, implying I'd gotten lucky or suggesting the money wouldn't last. None of them offered a genuine apology for the past, an acknowledgement of how their actions had impacted me. They only saw my success through the lens of how it affected them, whether it validated them, proving their sister was capable, after all, or provided a new resource for them to tap into. It became clear that their love and support were conditional, tied to my ability to fit into their established narrative and serve their needs. When I broke free, their response wasn't joy for my happiness, but discomfort and attempts to pull me back into the old roles. Setting boundaries felt like a constant battle. It meant saying no to requests for money, now framed as investments they deserved a piece of, no to demands on my time, no to letting them take credit for my success. We always knew Ellie would do well. It meant accepting that the relationship I had always craved, one of unconditional love, respect, and mutual support, might never exist with them. There were moments of profound sadness, grieving the family I wished I had. Holidays were particularly difficult. But there was also liberation. The weight of their expectations, their judgments, their constant neediness was lifted. I no longer had to perform for them. I could just be Ellie. My new life was busy, demanding, but incredibly fulfilling. I built a team, mentored others, and continued to innovate. I used my financial freedom to create a life that felt authentic to me. I traveled, supported causes I believed in, and invested in my own well-being. I found genuine friendships, relationships built on mutual respect and support, a stark contrast to the transactional nature of my family dynamics. I kept my family interactions minimal, polite, and carefully boundaried. I attended major events, like weddings, but kept them brief and emotionally distant. I didn't share details of my business successes or failures. It felt safer that way. They were still family by blood, but they were no longer the emotional center of my world. That space was now occupied by people who saw me, valued me, and celebrated me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. Looking back, the handmade samples I gave as gifts weren't just products, they were offerings of love, pieces of my identity I shared, hoping they would be cherished. Their dismissal wasn't just about the gifts, it was a dismissal of me. The multi-million-dollar deal wasn't just about money, it was a resounding affirmation of my worth, a validation that the girl who felt invisible had built something real and valuable. The betrayal by my family was a deep wound, but it also became the catalyst for my transformation. It taught me that I couldn't wait for others to see my worth. I had to claim it for myself. It taught me the importance of boundaries, however painful they are to set. It taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they are family. I am not the same person who sat in her tiny kitchen, crying over a dismissive comment about face cream. The pain shaped me, but it didn't break me. It forged a new kind of strength, a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you survived, you built, and you thrived, not because of the people who should have supported you, but in spite of them. My peace wasn't found in reconciliation or their eventual approval. It was found in my own self-acceptance and the decision to build a life where I was finally seen, valued, and free. The scent of lavender and shea butter still fills my space, but now it's a sprawling, professional laboratory, not a cramped kitchen. It smells like hard work, like resilience, like victory. And every time I smell it, I remember where I came from, and I smile, knowing how far I've come. So, that's my story. It's raw, it's personal, and it's taken me a long time to be able to share it openly. Being dismissed, undervalued, and taken advantage of by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, it leaves scars. It makes you question yourself, your worth, everything you believe. For years, I let their narrative define me. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need much, who was always there to pick up the pieces for others. And in their eyes, that meant I wasn't important enough for my own dreams to be taken seriously, for my own needs to be met. But that moment, that small act of saying, no, I need this for me, it changed everything. It didn't magically fix my family, and honestly, the relationship is still distant and complex. There's a quiet acknowledgement of my success now, sometimes even a grudging respect, but the deep emotional connection, the feeling of being truly seen and cherished for who I am, not what I've achieved or can do for them, that's something I've had to find outside of that dynamic. And that's okay. It took me a long time to truly believe that. It's okay to create your own family, your own circle of support, people who celebrate your wins and hold you through your losses, without demanding a piece of you in return. If you're watching this and you feel like you're in a similar situation, feeling overlooked, exploited, or like you have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's box, I want you to know you're not alone. Your feelings are valid, your dreams are valid, and you are absolutely, unequivocally worthy of being seen, heard, and valued. Setting boundaries is terrifying, especially with family. The fear of losing them, of being seen as selfish, it's immense. But sometimes, setting that boundary isn't about losing them, it's about saving yourself. It's about reclaiming your space, your energy, your sense of self. It's about showing the world and, more importantly, showing yourself that you matter. My journey from giving away handmade samples because I couldn't afford anything else to signing a multi-million-dollar deal wasn't just a business success story. It was an emotional marathon, a shedding of old skin, a fierce act of self-love. And the greatest gift I received wasn't the money or the recognition, it was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I am enough, exactly as I am. I hope sharing my story resonates with some of you. If it did, please consider giving this video a like, it really helps. Subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more stories like this, or maybe some tips I've learned along the way. And please leave a comment below. Share your own experiences, your thoughts, anything you feel comfortable sharing. Let's build a community where we can see and support each other. Thank you for listening. Remember, you are capable of building a life where you are truly valued. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but it is so, so worth it. You are worth it.